anything that we do, right? We are choosing between love or fear. Because if you really think about it, what drives our actions? Our actions are driven by emotions and reactions to things, right? Or by our own decisions that we make in our mind. So essentially, we are either driven by our heart or our mind. If we are driven by our heart, this is when we act from a place of love. When we are driven by worry, when we are driven by overthinking, when we are driven by fear, well, we are driven by fear. So essentially, anything that you do, any kind of reaction that you have is a byproduct of either your heart or your mind, right? And sometimes it can be hard to tell which one is it because too often what we do is we go in this autopilot mode, and when we get into this autopilot mode, sometimes we don't even understand what we are doing. We don't question our own behaviors. We don't question our own thoughts. We don't really question why are we doing it, right? But really, if you think about it, any action, any behavior that you ever have is driven by either of two things. It's either driven by heart, meaning it's driven by love, or it's driven by your mind, it's driven by fear, right? And sometimes it can be hard to tell, well, which one is which, because the most we know is what we feel and what we think. And our mind and our heart are meant to work together. They're not meant to work against each other, and yet so often it does, right? Because it's almost like we drive ourselves crazy with everything that we do in this life, right? Like, I used to live in my own head so much. Like, if I'm talking about this right now, right, then I was that person that constantly lived in a place of fear. Okay, it was like I would overthink everything, I would overanalyze everything, and I would rationalize myself out of myself literally all the time. What that means is that if my heart said do something, I would basically not do it because I would be afraid of the potential of the outcome, right? And it was like, well, but then are we happy, right? Like, are you happy with life? Is the way that you're living, the decisions that you're making, the choices that you have making you happy in life, right? Because what other is the point in life if we cannot be happy in it, right? So I think, as sometimes as confusing as it can be, we still have the power to choose between love and fear. Because if you really think about it, the way that we function in this life, what is our mind? Our mind is like a calculator, because we think something, and then where does that thought come from? How often do you question your thoughts, right? What are thoughts? Like, what is a thought? And who put it into your head? And why do we identify with our thoughts if we don't even know who put it into our head, right? Thoughts are interpretations of our feelings and our environment. We interpret everything around us, right? When we interpret the environment and we interpret our feeling or an event, then we get a thought, right? We get a thought. Sometimes when we interpret our environment, we can also get a feeling. But essentially, it can be really hard to know what you feel unless you really put words to it in your mind, because how will you know what it is unless you're able to define it? So that's the mind job, right? The mind is the one that defines things. The mind is the one that says, well, this is what you're feeling right now, and this is what that means. That's the job of your mind. The mind is the one that defines everything, and yet, how often do we question our thoughts? And how often do we just take it for granted that the way that we are running, the program that we have, the beliefs that we have that generate that basic interpretations of the world, we don't really question it, right? Because we're used to that. We're used to being a certain way. You're used to living a story that you have been living, and oftentimes we don't even question that, right? But really think for a moment. You in this moment are a product of your past and your current self, right? Or are you? Do you think that you have a choice? In this moment, if I said that you have a choice to choose who you are in this moment, because according to quantum physics, Every single moment, thousands of particles inside our body are dying and they're being reborn. So according to science, according to quantum physics, okay, and I have a physics degree, so I've been in that stuff for a while. You are literally made new every single moment because you are in this moment only now. The past they have exists mostly in our mind, right? It's there, it made us physically here, but the stories we tell ourselves, the meaning we give to stuff, it's only in our mind. Because if you think about it, like everything that happens in your life, every single thing in your past, you are remembering it, and through remembering of that, you are reliving it. Because according to science, there is very little difference that our brain can tell between what it is that we imagine and what is actually real. When we imagine something, if we put energy into it and we imagine it strongly, our brain doesn't understand if it's real or if it's not real. And they ran studies on this. They literally had people, and this is kind of weird, but they literally had people that were imagining that they were exercising, and they had people that were actually exercising. And the group that was just imagining, they actually stimulated parts of their body too. Because when you imagine something, right, you almost relive it. So every time you tell yourself that story, you are reliving it. And you know the broken phone example, when you from one person to another, someone tells a story and it tells the other person, and that person tells the next person and the next person and the next person, and by the time it gets to the end of the row, that person has a completely different meaning. And this happens in our mind as well, because every time we replay a memory, every time we remember it, it's likely that we remember it slightly differently based on the meaning we give it. And it's very real that sometimes two people go through the same experience and they recall completely different events. And there is proofs of that too. That two people can literally be together in an event and they can tell two completely different stories about what happened. So I think our memory is not really reliable, right? And yet we choose to suffer with that, but we don't really have to do that anymore. Because if you really see that our memory is fallible. Our memory is not what we think it is. It's not like you write something in the book. Our memory functions because we keep remembering the same thing, but through remembering it, we are reliving it. So essentially, if you think about it, right, you in this instant moment, you are essentially creating yourself every single moment. But we're used to creating ourselves from the blueprint that we were given when we were kids. However, if we are able to recognize that, if we are able to recognize the fact that my past and your past is a byproduct of us consistently recreating that past in our mind. It's kind of like if something happens painful in my childhood, right? And then I keep telling myself, well, this painful thing happened, so then it must be real and it must actually be painful. But the second I'm able to identify the fact that, yes, it was painful, but in this moment now, I am here. I make myself new every day. And together with that, I am no longer that person. You now are not the same as you were yesterday, only because, again, according to physics and science, I don't even know the numbers of this, but there's so many cells in your body that are just dying and being reborn literally every single second. Not just that, but if you think about it in terms of what defines you, who are you, what makes you, right? And so if you think of it, even your beliefs from today to the next day, they can vary, right? And so essentially, you're no longer the same person you were in any other instant in time other than right now. Because what you are experiencing right now in this moment, you are experiencing right now in this moment. All other time periods are just existing inside our mind. When we worry about the future, we worry about the future because it's almost like we live in the future. But we are not there yet. We don't know the future. The most we know is literally right now, and the best that our calculator, our mind, can actually interpret of the potential actions we may take and someone else may take, and through that we calculate what is the best potential future. And sometimes the fear gets in the way here. The fear is like, well, yes, and of course it makes sense because we are wired that way. We're wired for fear. We are wired for survival. We're wired that way, but we can rewire ourselves. And here is how, right? Every time that you think something about a potential future, what our mind does is it takes all the stimuli, it takes all the information, and it calculates it, right? And there's two potential ways it can go, right? Well, actually, there's three. The one is the one that we usually worry about, right? That's the one that's fear. That's like, oh, well, everything is going to crash and burn. Okay, that's one way. That's the one we usually get stuck on. The other way is that things will be okay. You will make it. It will be all right, right? But the middle ground, the way that is, in my opinion, the easiest on our emotions to take is a middle ground, which is that we just don't know. We get into ourselves so much sometimes that we think we know for sure what's going to happen, but we just don't. There is no way on earth we can ever know everything because we are not aware of everything in the way that we think we are. It's like, if you think about it, right? You are a particular conscious awareness inside of your body expressing through a particular singularity in the time and the moment, being in the place that you are inside of the body that you are, right? You are aware through your body. That is your expression. That is what you are aware of, right? Similarly, I am here. I am aware of myself through the time period and the place and a singularity in time expression inside of my body. So I am awareness inside of my body, and you are awareness inside of your body, right? That is just how we are. And therefore, it would be really hard for me to know what it is that you are going through because I am not aware the same way that you are, right? You are aware of yourself better than anyone else can ever be aware of you. So if you think about that, right, similarly to everyone else, I think it's just a little bit unfair for us to say, well, I know for sure what the other person will do because we just don't know that. We don't necessarily know what anyone else will do because we are not aware of them. They are aware of themselves, but sometimes we get into our own mind because of the way that things have happened before for us, and we're so used to things happening a certain way, and we don't want them to be painful anymore. So we protect ourselves, and we protect ourselves by building this wall, and we build this wall of just kind of getting so much in our head and just pretending that if only we can avoid those situations, we will be okay. And so we shut down from everything. When we shut down from the negative, we don't just shut down from the negative, we shut down from everything. Because if you think about it, right, we don't know that for sure that the negative will happen because, hey, humans are fully capable of doing things that they have never done before. This is how inventions are made, okay? Inventions are made because someone somewhere somehow decided that there's just going to be a new way to do stuff and they reinvented something, okay? So they're like reinventing the wheel. Well, technically, someone reinvented the wheel because there's different kinds of wheels. There's a wheel for the car, there's a typical wooden wheel, right? So someone had to basically reinvent the wheel in essence, right? So this stuff happens all the time, but sometimes we are really unable to get outside of our head and we build this wall of just expecting the worst and we get stuck in that first option of fear, right? But if you really think about that, not only are we stuck in fear, sometimes we're aware of the love aspect, we're aware of the fact that things might be okay, but because we don't always know how, we are not always aware of the middle ground, of the medium, of the knowing that we just don't know. Sometimes it can be hard for the ego self and my own ego self as well to accept the fact that I just don't know. And that is just how that is because I can pretend that I do. Like I can go through life pretending that I know for sure that this person will do this because they said they will do this or something or somewhere, but I just don't know that, right? But if we kind of get into our heads and we think that we do, and we kind of go with that, we're thinking that, oh, maybe I know that we hurt ourselves, because we put this attachment of an expectation onto someone or onto something, right? Because we expect them to be a certain way, we expect them to function a certain way and go in a certain direction, and if they don't, we end up getting burned big time. But the pain, the burning, is only letting go of old. It's what no longer serves you. It's kind of like if you think about a dog who's carrying a bone, right? When there comes a time for the dog to let go of the bone or someone rips it out of his mouth, it is painful for it, right? Because the dog likes that thing it's been having in his mouth for a while, okay? It's like it gets attached to that because it's nice, it's comfortable. I assume dogs like bones, so this is the example, but it's like when that happens, when it's taken away, when something we like is taken away from us, we are in pain. And that is okay because it's a change. Pain is essentially just change, and it can be used for good because when you are in pain, it means you are letting go of the old. You're making space for the new, and you're able to release that old energy that you had. And it's a beautiful thing because you're able to welcome this new energy. You're able to make space for a new, wonderful energy that will come into your life. So if you're ever in pain, just know that it's okay. It's okay to be in pain. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself live it. It's okay if you need to cry. Let it out because you're literally releasing that old energy. It needs to get out. And some of us, and myself too, like we've gone through so much trauma and so much pain that sometimes we just don't really want to feel it because it's a lot, and that is okay too. Honor your feelings, honor your limits. Know how much you can feel, but let yourself feel that. Don't ever judge the feeling. Feelings are like water, right? We don't judge the rain. We learn to appreciate it. We sit out the storms. And we understand that it's just part of the cycle, as is the sun that will soon rise again, right? It's just how that works. There is natural cycles in life. There's natural cycles in nature, right? Nature is constantly changing. And sometimes we miss the fact that rain has good parts too, right? Sometimes we think, oh, it's raining, it's not sunny, but there is a reason for rain. Why would it rain if there is no reason for it, right? It's happening for a reason, and so therefore it has value. Everything that is happening in this life is there for a reason, and if it is there for a reason, therefore it has value because somewhere, somehow it's beneficial to someone, some way, right? It's like if you think about the rain analogy, right? It's literally watering the earth. It's allowing it to get the water that it needs, get the nourishment that it needs, right? And our bodies need water too, and it's just a cycle of life, right? The sun happens, it heats up the earth, the water gets condensed, it rises up into the atmosphere, it goes back to the clouds, and then it comes back down as rain, right? It's normal. So until we learn how to dance in the rain, right? Sometimes we just don't because it's just painful and we don't want to deal with that, but we can still get through it. We can learn to sit out the storms because we know that it's okay. They happen. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to have pain. That is just an emotion. Anger, too, is just an emotion. In fact, anger, right? When you are angry at someone, it is because deep down you feel hurt at them, or you feel hurt by something they said that maybe hurt you in the past and now it's just being triggered, right? So essentially, that anger is also a signal that you are hurting someone. That is okay too, because oftentimes we judge emotions, right? It's kind of like we say, oh, one emotion is better than the other. But if you really think about it, right, anger can be channeled to get people out of lower vibrational states like complete apathy, right? Sometimes people are so deep down in despair, they're so suppressed. They need to get angry. They have to get that out because only through getting angry are they actually able to break out of that. And so it's a beautiful thing because someone is learning and growing and they're becoming more of themselves. And so I personally value that. Another use for anger is to establish your boundaries. If you ever feel angry, right, what does that mean? It can mean someone is trying to cross your boundary. And so in that, anger is something we can learn to channel inwardly in order to establish that boundary. So what do I mean by inwardly, right? When something comes up and you get upset with someone, first thing to do is to identify what is the thing that triggered you? What is the thing that caused you to feel this way? What is the thing that is coming up as maybe a boundary violation or maybe just a trigger to a previous boundary violation? Sometimes we get angry with something not because of them in that moment, but because of something associated to us in the past where our boundary was just broken. And so now we just don't trust ourselves anymore to maintain that boundary. And so we get upset almost with ourselves and the person because we remember the past when we were unable to maintain that boundary, right? And so the first step is to identify what is that boundary that you are essentially feeling like is being broken, right? Once you know what that is, it is then so much easier to actually step back and say, okay, so now that I know what it is, what can I do about it, right? Because sometimes what we need is not necessarily what we allow ourselves to have, right? Maybe what you need is something that you've never gotten before and you don't feel like you can ever have, and that is very painful. And sometimes that because it's so painful, we just literally get angry at everything and everybody because it's just so painful, we just don't know what to do with ourselves, but that is okay. And so, with that, right, anger can be used to establish a boundary within you because it's a signal for you. Like if someone's trying to take something and you don't like it, it makes you angry, it's because it's telling you that you don't like that. It's telling you what your boundary is. Like if someone's touching me, right, and I don't like to be touched, then, and I get upset with it, if I let them touch me, right, if I violate my own boundary, then it's almost like I'm betraying myself in essence. And so next time when someone does it, if I don't feel strong enough to say no and I let them do it, it's almost like I'm betraying myself, and that can be very painful in the future as well because next time this happens, it's almost like I can get into this panic mode of like, well, I get into panic mode because it's almost I don't trust myself to be there for myself, right? And that is one of the hardest things to get over because how can you really know what to do if you're not there for yourself, right? So step one really is even just being there for yourself, just trusting that you will be there for yourself. And that can take a lot at first too because we all have these things where maybe we didn't feel strong enough to say no at some point and then we got burned, but we only ever feel that. Like I would only ever feel not strong enough to say no because I didn't feel like I deserved to be there for myself, right? So this comes back to boundaries then. First, I identify what it is, right? If I want to heal from that. And second is, I must know that I deserve to have that, right? Because if I don't have that internal self worth, I will not have that strength to say no when I need to say no. And so I will violate my own boundary consistently. And that is not something you want to do because that basically breaks your own trust with yourself. And when we don't have trust with ourselves, right? Coming back down to our consciousness expression from your own particular singularity body expression in this time frame moment, if you don't trust the expression you are in, how can you trust anybody else? If you, within your body, the consciousness that you are inside of your body is the most direct link that you have to anything, because when you are expressing through your body inside of that, it's the most direct access that you have to awareness, right? If you really think about that, you are aware from the body you are in. That is the most direct access to your awareness. If you are unable to trust your own awareness, how can we ever trust anybody else that we don't have the same level of awareness with, right? I'm not aware to the same level that what my friend is feeling or my mom is feeling, that I am aware of what I am feeling, right? And so in essence, we can only trust more ourselves than anyone else. So it's like a scale, right? We trust ourselves more than we can trust someone else only because we know ourselves more than anyone else can really truly know us, right? And therefore, if you think about that, right, if we are unable to trust ourselves, when you look at you and do you trust yourself, right? If you have any kind of strange feeling to my question right now, when I say, do you trust yourself? What feeling comes up? How do you feel when I ask that question, right? If you feel a little bit iffy, then maybe you don't, but that is okay. It's okay because we all have that. But the only thing I am saying is it's really important for us to learn how to trust ourselves. Because if we don't, if you don't trust yourself, right, how can we ever trust anybody else? Because it's like we're aware of ourselves most. So, how can we trust more someone that we are aware of less? Right? That doesn't really make sense. We trust more that which we are aware of more, right? And that which we are aware of less, we naturally also trust less because we are less aware of it. And so it's the same with people. We trust everybody else less than we do ourselves. But most of us have self trust issues because we have all gone through stuff in life that just made us feel that way, right? And so it's really important to find within yourself a way in which you can be there for yourself more, right? And that is really your own individual thing, right? And it is definitely a process, and it just takes something that you want to do, right? It has to be something that you want to do. And what is the best way to do it? Well, I think it really comes down to this: what are you willing to do in order to trust yourself? Are you willing to go through pain? And are you willing to go through hardship and heartbreak? Because sometimes what happens is when we are growing in life and we're learning things and we're learning more of who we are, sometimes because of how deep our trust issues are, and this is true for my life as well, but you don't really trust yourself fully yet. It means that there's parts of you that you don't really know very well, right? And so when we find them, we essentially begin to change. And when we change, our life changes. And that can mean a lot of loss, right? And if you know anything and you've gone through change, you know that sometimes when you go through change and you find yourself, the things that make you happy don't always make the other people happy, right? Our friends and family want something for us, but we don't always want the same thing for ourselves. And it comes back down to this, right? We know ourselves best. They don't know us that well. You know yourself more than anyone else can ever know you. And so you know how you feel. And that feeling that you have is your truth. And so it's our responsibility to honor that truth. It's our responsibility to honor our feeling because this is the only way we have access to whatever the universe is trying to communicate to us. We only ever have access to the higher guidance through our feeling. But sometimes we are unable to identify what that feeling is because of fear that we have in our mind, right? Because how do we know what we feel? We feel something, and then it goes to our mind, and we get an idea of what we feel. But if that feeling is incompatible with our previous belief systems, with our society, with what we think we should be, behave, or do, we reject that, right? But it's all internal, right? So it's kind of like we almost deny ourselves our own selves. And that can be very painful too. And that can put us into major states of anxiety because it's almost like a part of you. Your feeling is telling you that, hey, I really like this. I really want to do that. This is what drives me. This is where my heart is. I love that, right? You feel it. You really feel that. But then when it gets to your mind, it's like, well, yes, but I shouldn't. What if? This is all brain talking, okay? The brain is the one that ends up getting us into trouble sometimes because it's important to acknowledge that this is just how you feel, right? It's okay. Whatever you feel, whatever you want, whatever you don't, it is perfectly okay. Allow yourself that. Because if you think about it, right? When we judge our feeling, every time you say yes, but I should, I would, it is all internal. It doesn't have anything to do with what you are doing externally yet, right? We are just processing. When the first feeling comes up, we're aware of it, we are just processing it. We're not doing anything with it yet. But even at the level of processing, we already reject it, right? So the best thing to do here is just when something comes up, when you get a feeling, allow yourself to feel it first. Really sit with it. And allow yourself the permission to also make the best rational decision that will be fitting into the physical reality as well. Because sometimes I have feelings that don't make any sense, but then I play a mental game with myself, right? I say, okay, so this is how I feel. So what if you could feel anything? If you could feel anything and there were no consequences, if you could just play a mental game here with me, right? When you get a feeling, some kind of feeling comes up, ask yourself, if you could for a moment pretend that you were not yourself, you stepped out of yourself, you became a completely different person, and you feel that, what would be the ideal expression? Just play it out in your mind for a moment, right? Just have fun with that, because it's like if you really want something, right? And you could be anybody, and you could do anything for a moment. Just pretend with me. If you could be anybody and you could do anything, and you feel that, your desire, your passion, what would that look like? What would it feel like, right? Again, we're not doing anything in the physical world, but what would that feel like, right? Allow yourself to feel it and let go of all expectations, because this is a mental game in which we can do anything we want, okay? Because in the real world, we're just sitting and we're talking, okay? Well, technically, I am talking right now, but in the real world, we are just sitting, processing stuff, right? That is the real world. Inside our mind, for a moment, we can take a few minutes to just process, right? Ideally, what would that feel like, right? Once you have that answer, then you can come back down to the real world and say, okay, now I know what ideally that feels like, and now how can I translate that or apply it or make it compatible with the actual reality? And sometimes we find that it may or may not be fully compatible with our reality, right? Sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. Sometimes it requires a bit of a stretch to actually be there. But one thing that I always know is that this exercise, the mental freedom, the freedom to for a moment feel, just feel that, just pretend it, right? Just feel that. It allows you the freedom to, at least within yourself, to be truly yourself. Because sometimes in the real world, we aren't able to express that for different physical obstacles, right? But at least within yourself, you can trust yourself to do that. And that's something that personally allowed me a lot. It helped me a lot because I was very suppressed when I was younger. Like I was just one of the most suppressed people that I know of, right? And it's like I would constantly think that I would want to do something. Like even with making videos, I was like, well, I want to make videos. I want to share with the world, but I would not let myself do that, because every time I would think about doing something, I would start to think, yes, but this and this and that, and it would always just kind of stop me, right? But one thing I realized is that if there's something I want to do, and it doesn't make much sense for me to not do it, because realistically speaking, it's okay, right? Whatever you feel and you want, it's okay. At least allow yourself to have that. And step one for me too was to just allow myself to pretend, what if I could? What would that feel like? And then I little by little started integrating that into the real world. And I think that's really the key too, to allow yourself that freedom to feel it, knowing that you don't have to integrate it into the real world yet. It's okay, because sometimes we're not ready to do that just yet. Sometimes we're so, far away from ourselves that sometimes we don't even allow ourselves the freedom inside of our own mind, let alone the real world. So the key to allowing yourself the freedom to feel and to imagine the reality that you want, what would that feel like, regardless of anything. Let go of all the physical expectations, knowing that you're not in the physical yet. You don't have to do anything. It's just something that you are allowing yourself to feel in order to discover what your truth is, right? And the more of yourself you discover, the more you will be able to trust yourself, and the more you will be able to go through life knowing that it will be okay. No matter what happens, it is there for a reason. And I hope that this makes some sense, and I hope that it helps. And yeah, thank you for listening, and thank you for watching, and I wish you all the best.